Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 2nd of February 2023. Let's get to it. We'll go first, actually, not to the maps. I want to look at, if I can get to the right place, the shelling that's taking place on the front lines. I think the shelling has dropped off a little bit. I think we are seeing less shelling around the Zaporizhia front line. We're seeing slightly less shelling even around Bakhmut and the Svatove to Kreminna front line there, and a little bit less across the borders. Apart from around Kharkiv, is a bit more towards Kharkiv, but yeah, I don't know. That just seems a little bit less than usual. Is that because they're getting ready for something? But then, if they're getting ready for something, surely the Russians should be softening up the sort of target area. Is it because they don't have the ammunition that they have had previously? So on and so forth. Okay, Kremlin to Siviersk front line. This is according to Defmon. It says the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Yampilivka and Spirne. Well, that's a bit further south than I want to go to start with. There's expected larger scale attacks in the Kreminna area, but today there were mostly smaller attacks. It's something to keep an eye on. Well, okay, well, let's go to our first port of call, which is the Svatove to Kreminna front line via Svatove. So here we have Kupiansk, Svatove, Kreminna, and we have not a lot to report as far as changing of territory, although it appears, so as no report says, no changes near Kreminna. It is clear that the Russian troops are attacking from the northwest towards the area between Kreminna and Yampilivka or Tierney. A big attack was repelled there. Further north around Svatove, no changes inside Kuzumivka. There are battles. Okay, let's put that on my map here. So the Svatove, Kupiansk to Svatove, we have fighting in Kuzumivka, but no real news about whether the Ukrainians have forced a breakthrough there. That's about the only place along the whole front line where the Ukrainians are on the offensive. Everywhere else, they appear to be on the defensive, including around Kreminna now. So this is the idea that the Yampilivka to Terny, the Russians are pushing here. So that's sort of northwest of Kreminna and towards Liman, in the Liman direction. The ISW has said that the Ukrainian and Russian forces have engaged in heavy fighting near Kreminna and Svatove. That's from Haidai. Haidai added the Russian forces have not yet formed an assault group in the Svatove-Kreminna direction, but are continuing to accumulate manpower and military equipment in the area. One military blogger said that the Russians have taken 800 meters, but that's otherwise undefined. A Russian mill blogger claimed on February the 1st that the Russians repelled Ukrainian efforts to advance into Kreminna. So this is the only place I've seen. I just said that Ukraine aren't on the offensive anywhere apart from Kuzumivka. Well, this is claims they are, but everyone else appears to say that that around there the Russians are on the offensive. And indeed, the same source says that the Russians targeted Ukrainian supply routes in the area and advanced into the forest west of Kreminna. So this is like the Ukrainians are attacking us, but we've advanced. So it's all a bit sort of confused, and it is attacks towards Yampilivka. So yeah, the Russians seem to be accumulating a lot of troops, and they seem to be brewing for something. Which, as you can see here from Tadrugami yesterday, which is a Ukrainian source, saying a large offensive of Russian forces in the Kreminna area is about to start. The 76th Air Assault will be the vanguard of the assault. Update as for 8:30 a.m. The enemy continues artillery shelling, but no ground force assaults at the moment. And that's about that for that area. He just says a lot about Vuhledar, but we'll get there a little bit later. And we'll move on to see what Rebar has to say. So it turns out that Rebar has not released anything in the last 24 hours, so I won't be referring to them. But Syriac Maps had some useful pro-Russian claims as far as territory and whatnot. So I'll be referring to them somewhat, and obviously the aggregated sources in ISW. Okay, other than that, it's just a case of moving on further south. So remember, Defmon was saying Spirna as well. There are repelled attacks around there, which is as we come down here, we have Spirna, and then we come down to the Bakhmut area, where there is, of course, lots of activity. So as you can imagine, in the Bakhmut area, there is pressure from the Russians all over the place. So that would include, towards Roslivka, Vesele. This village here, apparently, some Ukrainian sources are saying, yeah, Russians probably have taken Sako Vantseti. Some are denying it's happened. So ISW says, for example, geolocated footage shows that Russian forces have made slight advances northeast of Bakhmut near Krasnohora and northeast and eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, as well as south of Bakhmut near Opitny and on Bakhmut's southern outskirts, so pretty much everywhere. A Russian mill blogger posted video footage of a Wagner Group fighter in Blahodatne who claimed that Wagner has pushed Ukrainian forces 3 to 4 kilometers away, which is, quite substantial if that has happened. Russian mill bloggers additionally claim that Wagner has advanced along certain streets in the northern and eastern outskirts of Bakhmut itself. I'll show you that in a second. And that they continue to claim that Wagner forces are pushing northwest of the Klishchivka area towards Ivaniska and Bakhmut's southern outskirts in order to cut the highway there. And this village here, Russian claims that they have taken full control of that village, but other Ukrainian sources have denied that. Defmon says Russians are making incremental gains. I'm looking for if Russian forces manages to establish positions on the high ground west of the road, north of Bakhmut, and if they manage to establish control over the road between Ivaniska and Shchetiv Yar. Of course, they're the two main areas to look out for. No report says north of Soledar, PMC Wagner most likely occupied Sako Vantseti, although the evidence does not show a clear location. This rumor has been buzzing around for a few days. Fighting continues north of Bakhmut. Krasnohora has not fallen, but there is heavy fighting. So the Suryak maps shows you, well, before we get onto their mapping, let's just have a look at this. Video footage shows a Russian army and DPR shelling a trench built by the Ukrainian army west of Soledar city. It's expected Russians will try to storm this defensive line soon in order to expand the buffer zone. Of course, these guys never mention Wagner, so they must be in the lackeys for the MOD, but they are pretty accurate with their maps at the moment. So there's evidence of shelling of this place. So that trench area is here. So we will go to there. So that trench is exactly there, or at least that's where they've geolocated it to. So there are trench. This you can see is in my grey zone. This is where there are trench networks built. So we go back to Suryak, some kind of hedge line there, and as we zoom out of that, you can see that it's depends on which way around that is orientated. It looks like the trench networks are here, and that's that hedgerow that's now looking very wintry. So you've got trench networks there, and this goes on to high ground back there. So the Russians will be looking to storm those defenses, take them. But as I've mentioned to you before, they're also trying to get further up north. But that's why this tiny village is important, because if they can get up there, they can maybe bypass the trench networks by coming around to the side, although there are obstacles up here as well. Okay, so as we come further down south, Krasnohora is under a lot of pressure as the Ukrainians are moving further down south in Blahodatne. As you heard from one source, they claim to have gone 3 to 4 kilometers that way. Highly unlikely that is actually true, but there will be pressure pretty much everywhere. As we come further down south to past Pinorodny, we have further Suryak maps. So I'll show you the mapping that they have. They have themselves. If we go back to here, you can see it more clearly. So they have started with that little settlement up north there. And they claim that has been taken. They claim that some more land around Blahodatne coming towards Paraskevivka and Krasnohora, that Krasnohora is under a lot of pressure, but the Ukrainians are fighting back there. And in the northeastern outskirts, there are some more streets that have been taken near the Siniat plant here, and I'll show you all of these places on my map. And north of the Siniat plant, or northwest near the art winery, they have made some inroads as well there. And then we get on to Vuhledar. So let's go and look at that on my map. So it appears that they have taken some land here. As you can see, it's past the blue territory lines for the Ukrainians, and some further land here. I've kept my blue lines from yesterday, so they had taken this area, at least according to sources like Syriac maps. Now there's a some more streets have been taken in that northeastern area. Just in this is Maximienko Road, which is now under the control of the Russians, it appears, and you've got the garbage waste disposal, waste sorting plant there. And then as we come further down south, there's no map changes that I know of, but it appears that the Russians are certainly putting on a lot of pressure in Opitny, but particularly around the Klishchivka area as they are trying to force their way across this road to gain. It's already under fire control. You wouldn't really want to be using this road to get supplies into Bakhmut. Realistically, the only road into Bakhmut now is going to be this smaller road there. But again, that will be dangerous, and they will be able to get artillery onto that too, just not as effectively as they can on the T0504 road into Bakhmut. But anyway, lots of pressure going on around Bakhmut. How long will it hold out? Will they move back and go to Chasiv Yar, which is on higher ground here? And there's also sort of forest areas and marshy ground. This is so if it's not frozen, this is arguably a more difficult place for the Russians to take. So it won't be as built up as Bakhmut, street to street fighting, but the physical geography of Chasiv Yar is more difficult. So you've got forest, you've got boggy sort of marshland, and you've got your built up areas as well. On the Bakhmut side, it's whether they're going to hold out, try and bleed the Russians as much as possible, to pull back behind the river, and just hold on to the western side of the town. But of course, that is dependent on whether there's this encirclement is successful for the Russians. If they start, if the encirclement gets right round all the way round to, let me get the right color, to here. So say they have that land and they get this land, then realistically you want it to be pulled out because it's not too difficult for them to be then cut off. So really the decision to pull out is going to be, it will be being made now, and you might well see an operational withdrawal happening over the next few days or week. There's an interview with a Ukrainian serviceman that ISW discusses here. So, Ukrainian servicemen operating in Bakhmut provided granular insight into Russian tactics in the Bakhmut area. The Ukrainian Joint Forces Task Force posted an interview on February the 1st with the soldier who stated the situation in Bakhmut has recently radically changed since Russia has committed competent Wagner and main directorate of the Russian General Staff, GRU operatives to the front line. Wagner and a GRU may be committing more elite special operations and reconnaissance elements to augment human wave attacks in the Bakhmut area. So it's gone to like a different phase now. The serviceman also noted that, because there was another interview I saw recently, or read yesterday, where another Ukrainian was saying it's not just human waves, it's just non-stop. They don't come in waves, they just don't stop coming. And then they were literally talking about running out of ammunition, and they're everywhere, and we just don't have the ammunition to take them out, because there are just that many of them. So but it may have moved from that kind of phase to this one. The serviceman also noted that Russian forces are conducting fairly successful infiltration techniques in Bakhmut by sending unarmed, unequipped camels, military personnel, to deliver ammunition and weapons to frontline positions, and that these camels are often able to approach Ukrainian positions without detection. The serviceman stated that Russian forces identify and destroy buildings that Ukrainian forces operate out of. These techniques, which are likely helping reinvigorate the stalled Russian advances in and out of around Bakhmut, are not likely scalable to support larger offensive operations. It's also unclear how effective they would be in terrain lacking the kind of cover they appear to be using immediately around and in Bakhmut. So basically, what he's saying here is that I'm going to go back to Bakhmut. Sorry. So he's saying that these guys are infiltrating into Bakhmut. So I assume this is what they mean. So you'll get certain accumulations of Ukrainian troops in certain houses or whatever, and you get individual people who are maybe just have a few guns to give to other people or a bit of ammunition, but they're on their own. And so it's not like a whole unit, and they can they can get around undetected under the cover of all these buildings, and they'll be scouting out certain areas and then feeding back that information back to the Wagner sort of command, who will then strike these buildings. That's not something that you'll be able to do necessarily on a larger, out in the fields and in larger. It's not scalable up to like large offenses, but in these kind of tiny pockets of fighting and whatnot, having individual people running here and there and getting sort of behind the lines and doing a bit of recon is seemingly very useful for the Russians, and gives viable intelligence that can allow them to take out certain buildings and troop accumulations, and that is being a real thorn in the side of the Ukrainians. I just want you to hear this is what Kenneth Gregg, who's a Swede fighting uh, in Ukraine at the moment, and he goes to several places, but here is his synopsis, and it's quite interesting insight. How accurate, I don't know, but it's useful, I think. Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut, fighting is fierce, and the enemy has come into the city suburbs to stay. We have not been able to drive them out, but now the tactic is to stall them as much as possible. Chasiv Yar is becoming an increasingly important place for us as the weather changes from cold to warm. It sits on a hill surrounded by wetlands and marshes. In order for the enemy to get onto Kramatorsk, they have to take the town, and that will probably require at least the same forces as at Bakhmut. The chance that the enemy would start advancing anywhere else than here in the Donbass is minimal. This is probably where the war will be decided, when we get the really heavy weapons in and when the weather permits. Although much is written in the media about the enemy's gains, in reality, they are very small. Yesterday's loss ratio was 1-9 in favor for us in the Bakhmut area. So he's saying that the Ukrainians are losing one troop and the Russians are losing 9. But so they may be making territorial gains, but at a significant cost. Of course, can't verify those claims. Although I have seen video footage of streets in Bakhmut with Russian dead bodies lying around them, and quite a few of them. So there is some. I mean, I can't show it to you; it's pretty inappropriate. But there is evidence of quite a number of Russian casualties in Bakhmut. As far as Avdivka is concerned, no real news coming out there at all from any sources. So just same old, same old. You'd assume there's probably activity going on around Vodyane towards Siverne, just here, possibly, who knows, Pervomarsky, but not heard anything. So, and then we get on to Marinka, further down south from Avdivka, and again, just normal attacks that are taking normal. I mean, it's horrific, but nothing to report that's out of the ordinary, just continued attacks in Marinka. And then we get to Vuhledar, which is, one of the main sources of activity in the area. Defmon says Russian forces keep attacking but are not having much success. There have been no official reports, but it just wanted to highlight that fighting is still going on there. So again, not that much news. And Vuhledar, I can be brief. Artillery reinforcements did their job very well. Russian troops are pinned down in Mikilska. They tried attacking today towards a coal mine and they failed. Defmon has reported that 3,000 to 5,000 troops are brought to Mariupol. New meat for the grinder. Tatragami says, okay, a few days ago, I wrote that the enemy made a few interesting decisions. I would like to shed some light on it. After the first 2 days of the assault, it became clear to the Russian command that their plan of a rapid and sudden assault has failed. Instead, they frantically started to move units from other areas. For example, they have moved one more brigade from the 3rd Army Corps and a few battalions from the 36th Army. The enemy also abruptly moved reserves, which was supposed to advance in a different sector. Personally, it seems that the enemy generals act like a gambler who is trying to win back money he's lost. Sunk cost fallacy. This is what's happening. By borrowing even more money from friends and family. Because of this, this battle for Vuhledar is likely to be much longer and bloodier than it was anticipated. Quick update. This, despite initial information about enemies' intention to start an offensive operation today, as well as continuous artillery fire and concentrated VDV forces, it didn't develop into a large offensive, as I said originally. Instead, there are only some local attempts. The error was not intentional. I believe I made a mistake reporting it too early instead of giving it more time for development before reporting on public. So this is him sort of walking back. The enemy still might start an assault at any time. Just because they didn't start it in the morning doesn't mean they won't start it later. So he was talking about whether they are going to start a big assault, and they haven't done so yet. But actually, that might even be the Kreminna area. Anyway, apologies. But basically, he talks about the sunk cost fallacy, and I saw a talk about this somewhere else, where it's like they are basically borrowing troops from, like you're borrowing money from friends and relatives. They're borrowing troops from here, there, and everywhere to pile into this axis in a repeated fashion. And it's just, you've lost those troops. Don't try and get them back. You can't get them back. You've lost them. You're not going to win this by just doing the same thing over and over. And yet they don't seem to have learned. They've learned so insofar as they are attacking from multiple places now, instead of just originally months back they were just doing the Pavlivka attack. Now they're trying to do something a little bit different, a little bit cleverer, but not really that much, because they are still getting hammered and losing troops and material hand over fist, and they are not succeeding. They are back to being hemmed into Mikilska with Ukrainian artillery, and it is not being successful. But if you want to borrow more money to keep betting on winning that game, then you go for it. It's a pretty horrific game, and the losses are not just money but human lives. But that appears to be what they're doing. So let's move on. As no report says, Kremlin supporter Wargonzo now also confirms this, which is that they're moving to a more kind of artillery-based attack. So Russia's changed from ground attacks to artillery, and that's not because of strategical reasons, but because they lack pushing power and got absolutely demolished over the last couple of days. They could be waiting for those reinforcements from the different areas, like I was talking about with the sunk cost fallacy. As we pull out of the Vuhledar area and look at Zaporizhia, no news to report along the Zaporizhia front. No real news to report along the Kherson front. There are boats, little boat recce missions going on both sides. I've seen like boats be landing on the islands around here, and they're like Russian boats landing, and then Ukrainians firing at them, and then retreating, so on and so forth. That kind of stuff is taking place quite consistently. And Zaporizhia, an ammo depot was hit, one of probably several. This is the only one we've got sort of that I've seen footage of. That's taken out, I presume, a HIMARS attack, or I don't know if it's in range of long range artillery. Might be actually. So either or, that has been taken out. Those kind of things happen on a nightly basis, and there you have it. That's the Frontline update. Anyway, thank you very much for bearing with me. Please like, subscribe, and share. This is the Frontline update. Hope it was useful for you, and take care. I'll speak to you soon.